Sorry about that. Yeah, we're up now.
No worries. Thank you.
I see that was the problem. All righty.
I got busy on another project, and in about 30 seconds until 3 o'clock, I got a call from Celia.
Oh, no worries. Looks like it's just me and Julie right now, so it's all good.
Yeah, I'm really not here, so it's
Not
okay.
here. Just a ghost in the
Yeah,
background.
yeah. This
Fair enough.
my avatar's just visiting.
That's nice. Well, Julie, I think it's just you and me. I don't know where everybody else is at, but you and I can get started if you want.
Sure, if there'll be a quick little budget meeting.
Yeah. Do it. It's like you get like a one-on-one time with somebody in the finance office. You can't beat it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's talk about immediate training.
Right.
Good. Now I don't have to mess with the back of my rest of my background. I guess I should turn my thing and do all
Yeah.
that. I'm
Yeah,
usually
you're
on my laptop, which faces in a completely different direction, but I've been working today, so I'm on my bigger screen
yeah.
and it faces this way.
Right. Right. Well, you're with friends, so no worries. Mine's not much prettier in the background. So
Yeah, it's the spare room, but it's got my office in it on the other side. So
right. Right. When I was during COVID, we were not prepared to go virtual, and my daughter had just been born, so I was literally sharing our nursery
yeah,
with
yeah.
my daughter. It was good times. So
Well, it was as the executive director of Hope and Safety Alliance, when we all pivoted, we're having to answer our crisis line 24 hours a day, right? And we
mhm.
didn't have work cell phones, and we barely had enough laptops to kind of be shared because we weren't set up for that. Everything was desktops.
Mhm.
And I'm sitting there trying to have a Teams or Zoom meeting rather, and I'm looking at my staff, and half of them can't even connect to the internet. They can't do it on their phone because everybody has different phone services. And I'm all, wow. And then I'm looking, you're in a bathroom, someone else is in a bedroom, they're sitting at the kitchen table with their kid next to them, and I'm like, okay, we got to rethink this whole thing. And
Yeah.
that's when we got work phones. I got some money for laptops, everybody got it. I had to pay to increase infrastructure in some people's homes so that they get a better internet connection, you know? So yeah, it was all kinds of that. Mhm.
Wild times. Pushed
Hey,
us in a new,
Ron.
that's for sure. Hey, Ron.
Hello, good afternoon, Jonathan.
Good to see you again. So I think it's just us three. So I was just saying we could get started. And Ron, you saw this last week, so this will be a repeat, but you're more than welcome to ask questions and we'll just kind of have a fun conversation about finance and budget for the next little bit.
Well, I really joined mostly to give my perspective on what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
So if I might start, we might be able to let you guys go home early.
I'll take extra time. We have other things we can do, but I'm more than happy to spend a little bit of time with you guys this afternoon. So that works for me.
I've been attending the local school board budget committees and also the urban renewal for our city.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get a little lost. Which one am I in and which one's up?
That's fair. That's fair.
But an observation is that there is such uncertainty in our financial status right now. I look at it like even the best of the minds are figuring we're going to have a recession if we're lucky. And it doesn't get worse than that because business does not like uncertainty.
Right.
And boy, if we're not uncertain, you got to fool me. And I think that I've seen a lot of people who don't have the perspective of years, like those of us with gray hair have, and reading history with what went on in Germany at a comparable point. And it doesn't scare me other than the fact that people, you're more aware of it, you can make slightly better plans, but that's what I'm looking at, John.
Yeah. Uncertainty is a crucial and key word that we have been using a lot lately. And so what I can do is because Julie wasn't here last time, I'm going to go through the slides mostly because I put work into it and I just want to show it off, why not? And we can use it as discussion as we go through. I'd love to hear y'all's input as long as we're not discussing exactly the FY26 budget because Oregon law won't let us talk about it until we publish the document, but we can talk about the things at large as we go through it, if that works for you.
Well, and I'll just let the two of you know too that, and Ron, it's nice to meet you. I'm looking forward to working with you. Is I'm a futurist, right? I'm trying to forecast into the future, and uncertainty does just pretty much stops that. And so I've been talking about that for a really long time. So I'm grounded in those principles and understand what we're about to face, and am glad that I'm going to be part of the budget committee. So just
Me
letting
too.
you know that I got that in my body.
Love it. Yeah, I'm a forecaster at heart too, that crystal ball kind of thing. I'm not an accountant, and I get real I struggle with getting tied down on the pennies, but I
Yeah.
do like thinking about the process and the structure and the outward thinking and how to make it transparent and collaborative. And that's kind of the philosophy that the budget office approaches this.
Yes.
We have a lot of things that we're facing at the college, but I think that we're getting there. We've made improvements. So, and you'll hear more about that as we go through the budget process in the next 4 to 5 weeks. So I'll share my screen. We'll get started. Like I said, this is super casual, so feel free to jump in with questions and conversation. Okay. Can y'all see my screen?
Yep.
Let me make your side bigger here. Okay. So this is me. This is our college. This is the agenda. A little less formal since we're not in don't have the full group, but this is generally what we walked through last time. I'll talk a little bit. We just did introductions. Ron, Julie, Ron. I'm Jonathan. Nice to meet you. You'll see more of my face than you usually do, but Kara will be around. My budget team, they're superheroes. They're awesome, wicked smart. They'll be along for the ride too. So we're here to help guide everyone through the process a little bit. I'll talk about what we were just talking about, the things that we think about, the overarching trends that we see, not just here at the college, but at large, because they all work together. I'll talk about the process itself. And I think both of y'all have been through this, so I'll go through it really quickly, but the financial structure of how we're set up. And then we'll also talk about generally some planning assumptions that we lay into the framework, and they kind of tie together with the top section here, and then we'll talk about the next steps. So this is your team. The way we're set up is you have a team that's on the budget committee that's elected by the board members. So it's your full team here, plus the Board of Education, right? So when we get together at the beginning of May, we'll all be in the same room together in the boardroom here and on Zoom to kind of work together to ask questions and walk through the proposed budget itself. Hopefully we'll have some time before the meeting starts for us all just to say hi and get to know each other as people. Here's some unknowns, and you just mentioned them, right? So all uncertainties, all challenges, things that are unknown. We look at federal funding because that flows down to the state funding. We all feel it. We know that there's a whole lot of chaos and uncertainty, and we don't know what is going to come of it in the next year. So we are trying to plan for that as best as we can. We don't know how to plan for it other than just being conservative. We'll get the economic outlook in May. The state of Oregon loves to wait until the last minute to give us the Q3, Q4 data to say, here's what we think is going to happen. Again, a lot of it depends on the federal funding. A lot of it depends on things like income taxes and the revenues that go into the state funding and the banks. We'll look at enrollment, which is also really uncertain right now. Right now, we're on an upward trend, which I'll talk about, but we don't know what impacts are going to come. There's a whole lot of psychology that goes into enrollment. We have a really strong IR team, so institutional research. They're the ones that work with our faculty and our staff to try and keep students in the classroom, to get students engaged at the community level. So they have really good data that we feed into our models, and they're at the table when we're developing our budget, which is really good. I have heard that we've had the best integration of that data now than we have in the past 10 years, but it's still really uncertain. So the last three are interesting because it's a lot of psychology, right? So consumer sentiment, and what I mean by that is how do people feel about higher education, also the cost of higher education, and also how we compare to our peers. So let me go down the list here. So we know that grants are being impacted. We know that financial aid is being impacted, but we don't know how yet. It's all kind of still working itself out in the system. And so it's exactly that. We don't know what it is. There's unknowns, but what we can look back on are other precedent events where things like the FAFSA had a delayed release. There was some technical issues with the FAFSA this past year, and it really impacted enrollment because students who are in the low income band who use financial aid to go to school, they couldn't get access to financial aid. And so they said, you know what, I'm just going to sit it out for a term. And we had to work really hard to bring those students back into the college. So that's just one thing that we look at. Nearly a third of the state budget is federal funding. So if federal funding goes to the wayside, then all of a sudden we all have to reorganize ourselves within the governor's budget.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So is that, when you say a third of the budget is federal funds, is that direct federal funds or is that pass through federal funds?
To the state, it's a combination of both, I believe. I don't know.
So it is, so you are LCC gets it passed through from the state.
Right,
Federal
exactly.
funds. Okay, that's what I'm asking. All right.
Oh, gotcha. Yep. For us, it's all passed through.
Okay.
Yep. And even our grants that we have that are passed through federal funding, almost all of them are, I would say 90% of their are passed through. Things like our TRIO grants, what we get from the U.S. Department of Education, we're a sub-recipient on several grants from
Great.
other universities. Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. Medicaid is kind of it's at the top of it's a hot topic in legislation right now, how to figure out how to make that work. So if that becomes a bigger hot topic, then we move down in the priority list, right? So that means less funding for us. I'll talk a little bit about the governor's budget in a minute. We know that right now, oh, that's the next bullet point. So we know that right now the governor's budget is a increase of about 6%. For us, direct pass through, you'll see a couple of different numbers, but what we receive at the college is going to be about a 6% bump, but it's still working its way through legislation, and we still haven't received the economic forecast. In prior bienniums, the governor's budget has been pretty much the guarantee of what we'll get. It's a solid starting place, but with so many uncertainties, there's no guarantee that that will be the floor this year. It's
Yeah.
also short of what we're asking, the community colleges are asking for. So we've heard them talk about the number of 970 million. Well, our number is 850 million, which is an increase, but not at the rate where we need it to be for us to sustain in the immediate short term.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of flat funding requests.
Yeah,
I've seen, yeah. Mhm.
exactly. And it passes right down to the institution at the granular level. So
Yeah.
it's something to keep in consideration. Okay. So historically, the pie has gotten bigger, but our allocation of the pie has remained flat. And that's because there is a very convoluted formula that goes into determining what our allocation is. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But
That's
generally,
that 8% thing that Tara mentioned.
yeah, exactly. So the pie gets bigger, but they take all these different factors to determine how much of that pie we get. And almost all of this community colleges have remained the same over the last many biennium. So as the pie gets bigger, we all kind of stay at the same allocation.
I see.
You'll hear me use the word TP or the acronym TPR a lot. I apologize for the acronyms. It stands for total public resources. So it's what of the governor's budget gets allocated to community colleges. They call that the TPR, the total public resources that are available to us.
So the TBR would be specifically related to community colleges. I don't have to infer or take out other educational institutions.
Right, exactly. So total public resources is that $870 million bucket that they go hand in hand. So
Okay.
say TPR, it's 870. Right.
Right.
So I mentioned the perception, right? So this is important because we are in a time where it goes against normal psychology of, at least we think, or we don't know how the psychology works in the current landscape that we're in. More and more students are becoming educated and starting to calculate their return on investment to go into higher education, whether it's universities, community colleges, technical schools. And whether or not that data holds true, it still is a perception. And so it's something that we consider when we talk about enrollment. In prior times, you would see unemployment go up, and you would also see enrollment go up. And the psychology is the thinking that I'm unemployed, I want to go back to school and change my trade, get better at what I do, become more educated. That didn't happen during COVID because of the psychology of, well, I don't want to be in a classroom with a bunch of people. I don't know if this is important enough. I'm fine where I'm at. And so that's what we're trying to kind of suss out when we look at the data from the institutional research perspective is, what do people think of? What do students think when you ask them to enroll in a class? And so we don't know yet how that plays out on the psychology of enrolling at school. Does that make sense with how the perception has changed a little bit for higher education? And how it impacts our finances?
Yes, it's just hard to extrapolate that off these graphs.
Totally. And this is, so you can ignore it's more to portray that there is a perception, about higher education that is different from what it has been in the past. And it
Okay.
goes back to the uncertainty of what that will do for enrollment in the near future.
So given that we're seeing an uptick in enrollment, how does that analysis play out in that scenario? Because we built up enrollment and we built in retention. I mean, I know that's still uncertain because there's a lot of stuff coming our way, but how would that perception and those trends analysis affect or play out in that particular result?
So it's a piece of the projection. And so again, we're conservative in our enrollment projection, where instead of saying, oh, employment's going to go down, there is a rate of X that goes up when unemployment goes up. We govern it back in our thinking and say, instead of it, I'm just using an example here, this isn't real, but saying if unemployment goes up to 5%, then our enrollment goes up 5%, we might tick it back like 1 percentage point just to say that some students might not think it's important enough to go back to school.
I see. Okay.
Which translates in rough terms to less dollars coming to the institution.
Understood.
So you can see here that our enrollment is up. It's trending up, and we call it a trend because it's been more than 3 terms of an enrollment going up. So that's a good sign. But I would like to point out that we still are not back to pre-COVID era of enrollment. You can see and in FY12 was at the recovery height of the Great Recession. So you can see in 2008, 2009, unemployment went up, enrollment went way up. And then it kind of scaled back as unemployment went down, and it followed the correlation followed each other. But then when we hit COVID, unemployment went way up, and I'll show it here. You can see it here in 21, that's the COVID years. But our enrollment actually continued to go down. So it was an interesting psychology of where are we at now in terms of the perception of higher education and the return on investment for students to come back into the classroom. So while our enrollment is going up, we don't know yet what that correlation is going to be.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that there's another variable in there that has to be taken into consideration. I'm sure you guys talk about it, is that pay went up during that time. So as we're coming out of COVID and we're trying to get workers back in, the pay went up dramatically. I mean, I think from 2019 to 2022 or 3, I mean, salaries in my office went up almost 12%, 15%. In some cases, even higher, just to be competitive. So
Right.
So people were getting paid a lot more than they were before COVID. And so they
Absolutely.
went on unemployment and then they came out with a $25 an hour job.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of several anecdotal situations off the top of my head too, where yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next factor that we kind of put in here is the demographic cliff. Have y'all heard of this before?
I've heard of it, but it'll be fun to hear you explain it.
Okay. So in a nutshell, there are less people having babies, right? Less people going into the population, less people moving around the country, specifically to Oregon, means that there are less people available to go back to school. Originally, the demographics showed that there was one demographic cliff where there are less 18-year-olds available coming out of high school. And we can see that here in this first circle. But then there was a study that was done not too long ago that showed that there is actually a second cliff where it dips and then it plateaus, even goes up a little bit, and then dips again.
Wow.
So by the time we get to 2040, the total available population of 18-year-olds to enter into college is drastically lower than what it is today. It has nothing to do with the psychology in this variable, has nothing to do with the return on investment, but it is purely a numbers game of there is less people available to come to college. So that's what you'll hear us talk about that a lot. It's coming through the pipeline now in many institutions across the country. 4J and the other local schools within our county have started talking about it already. So we're going to see that play out within the next year or two.
Wow. That's pretty significant drop.
Yep. Yeah. And so it will force us as an institution and as an industry to determine how we want to be very efficient with our education. What is it that we want to target as an institution, and how can we help our community?
Yeah.
Okay. So we also talk about the cost. So this is a comparison of the CPI, or the inflation rate, against what's called the HEPI. So the HEPI is the CPI, but it talks about just higher education as an industry. And so you can see they kind of follow each other. The blue line is CPI, or inflation, as you see, and you've heard a lot about inflation and politics and economics. It's come down, and now the HEPI and the CPI rate are about the same. Why that's important for us is because we use it as a rule of thumb when we're doing tuition setting. So we have not yet, we're starting to do this cost analysis here at the college. We talk about how much does it cost to do a thing, and you can fill in the blank with XYZ, whether it's a program, whether it's a study, whether it's all the things. But we talk about how much does it cost to the student. And we talk about that a lot when we're engaging our stakeholders about how we set tuition. And so the tuition rate by the board, Julie, was set at 3.1%, and now it's $149 per credit. That represents more or less that HEPI rate that you're seeing right here. And we use that right out of the gate when we talk about costing. And that's why we have it as a very big metric here when we talk about the costing variable within our budget. That makes sense?
Yes, but Ron, were you talking?
I can just relate it to what goes on in Florence right now. Last year, there were 8 houses built in Florence, which is, when we have a need of about 150 a year, not very significant.
Yeah.
That, and what we're looking at the graph is what happens when, if they're not, and student enrollment in 4J has gone down. And it appears that it will continue to go down, which gives you the opportunity to adjust your cost structure somewhat.
Yeah.
That's the only alternatives.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I just wanted to, there was a comment that was made at one of our board meetings about, oh, I'm really glad that it was, that the tuition rate came in with the HEPI. But in this particular case, that would not, if we were in 2022, that would not be a good statement. Like, so is the higher education price index, I mean, we surely wouldn't want to set tuition to track it, right?
No, and that's why it's not the only metric by which we set the tuition rate, right? So if we raise tuition this year by 7% on a student, that would be cost prohibitive to the student.
Yeah.
And what we use it as a metric for us to start the discussion. So it's, while we don't follow it exactly, we do use it as kind of our benchmark.
Are there groups that think that we should be following a HEPI rate cycle for tuition? I mean, that comment threw me off. He went in, now that I've looked at this graph, because I was like, I didn't know what HEPI meant. So, now I do.
It's in normal times, it is easy enough to follow the HEPI because it doesn't spike that often with how you're seeing here. If there's a resource at the end of this slide deck where you can go look at the history of the HEPI and the CPI, and very, very rarely does it spike. This is actually a pretty big jump, right? And this is all COVID related.
Yeah.
So normal times we would be pretty spot on to the HEPI unintentionally, right? We use it as a rule of thumb, we use it as a benchmark, and we can say when we look at our costs, it generally follows the HEPI, like close. But to your point, salaries have really gone up because of this cost inflation that you're seeing here. It's driving a lot of our costs. And so we can say that we're going to follow this, and we talk to the students, we talk to our stakeholders and say, should we set it higher to accommodate retroactively these bumps? And the answer is usually no, because we don't want it to be a burden on the students to come be in the classroom. That's not, but at the same time, and the students have recognized this more and more, is that we understand that there are costs and there's inflation and things that we have to pay for. But at the same time, if less students are enrolling, you have kind of this declining return on investment when you
Yes.
raise tuition. So it's a balance for sure.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Last point, and then I'll move on to the more of the mechanics, but this is, we talk a lot about our comparative rates to our peer institutions. And these are all of the tuition rates and fees associated with each college within the 17 colleges. And Julie, you've probably heard this a lot too. We talk about how we are the most expensive college.
Right.
And that's a true statement when we try to break it down apples to apples. There's a whole lot of granularity to that, but we are the most or one of the most expensive. And so it's something we're going to want to tackle in the long range forecast, so in the kind of the near term. Back to that point of if we're competing against online schools and we're making it too expensive for students to come here, then there's no point in it being so expensive. So
Is that metric of numbers? Is that just that's just credit hours that doesn't take into consideration the population served?
right.
Okay.
Right. Purely trying to get apples to apples of how we compare. Yeah, there's hours and hours of material of breaking this down for sure. And
Yeah,
I'm happy
well,
to do it.
and different analysis. I mean, we're the two second Lynn and us are the two big counties outside of Multnomah, and Multnomah has multiple systems there. So I was just curious. All right.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Those are the kind of the high level macro variables that we look at. Does all that kind of make sense? That's kind of the thicker stuff. The rest is all mechanics, but I want to make sure that that's clear before we start diving into the nitty gritty a little bit.
Clear to me.
Okay. Ron, make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So Oregon budget law, we're held to this. The story goes many years ago, all of the colleges were doing it a different way. No one could understand who cost what, why, or how. So Oregon passed the Oregon budget law to give us a framework by which we could pass a public budget. And that's where we're at. I won't give you the whole history, but generally speaking, it gives us a way for us to set costs, to set an estimate of what we're going to do in the coming year. The purpose of your role is to help us walk through that framework and set a reasonably estimated budget. So these are the rules. I won't go through them because I think y'all know them pretty well. But generally speaking, we have to have a quorum. We have to meet at least once, right? Not this meeting, but we have to meet at least once in May for me to give you the proposed budget and for y'all to talk about it. Whether or not we meet again is kind of up to the team. And then we approve both the budget. We also have to approve property taxes and the levy on the bond. And then we also have to then make an approved recommendation. This is kind of the difference of the roles here. Ron, you and the budget committee will then make a recommendation to the board to adopt a budget. So the rhythm will go, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it a little bit more. And then the budget committee will make a recommendation for the board to adopt the budget. And then at the beginning of June, hopefully the idea is that we will come to a consensus and pass or adopt the budget so that way we can continue on functioning in July. Without that adoption, we cannot function. We don't have the authority for us to spend money. So, yeah, Julie.
Okay. So budget committee membership. So at this particular stage, every single board member is a member of the budget committee.
Right.
And yet the budget committee is making a recommendation to the board. I'm assuming the board isn't involved in that. I mean, like, where's that part? Do we have meetings where the board isn't there?
Nope, the board is there for the whole party. So,
Okay.
right, so the board will participate. We make it a bigger group intentionally so we can have more brains in reviewing this nitty-gritty budget. And so the budget committee, which includes the board, so Julie, you'll put on a different hat. You'll put on your budget committee hat and have the discussion. Then you will make a recommendation to approve the budget. It's in a sense, you're making it to yourself, but also your fellow board members.
I see.
And then in June, you put on your board hat and you have more discussion to adopt it.
Got it.
Yep.
Makes sense.
All right, so this is a little bit of the history. The idea is that we wanted to have a framework. We wanted to have public engagement and give opportunity for everybody in the community to engage at somehow, some point in some way. So we'll have public comments. It's open to the public, and that's why we can't talk about the exact proposed budget at this point in time because we haven't made it public. But once we do, we encourage all citizens to come and participate in the budget, to listen to it, to make professional and respectful statements about the budget, and then for the budget committee to have a lively and respectful conversation about how to pass the budget. This is my favorite chart. Oh, go ahead, Julie.
Never mind. You're going to get to it. I see it right
Okay.
now. Oh, I see it on this chart. You're going to answer that question.
We are here,
Yes.
right? This is Oregon budget laws, easy 11 steps or whatever to pass a budget. But as you can see, there are many more than 11 steps. So, but this last chunk goes pretty quick, right? We aim to adopt the budget at the beginning of the June because then as soon as y'all adopt it, the budget team has to turn around and do all the other stuff to make it happen. So, Julie, if you can, let's pass it at the beginning of June. Here's our internal calendar. So think of your role as the public-facing outward role, but there's about 6 months of work that goes into the proposed budget itself. We're here in April, so we've had all these steps before that started way back in the fall. That's why I have a job, which is kind of fun. But then we also work with all of these, I call them internal budget partners. It's our deans, our directors, our faculty, our students, all the people in the community, our foundation staff, our cabinet, the president. We all talk about this nonstop for about 6 months. And then once we pass it in June and we put it into the system, and then I take a vacation in July because I've been talking about it for 9 months.
So, is this we're getting a biennium budget from the state, essentially, which is the predominant funding. I mean, I would imagine most of it's biennium. So is our budget a biennium?
I wish. And I would like to move towards that, to move to passing a 2-year budget. The city of Eugene does it and it works swimmingly because you have 1 year of all of this work and then you adopt it and then you reopen it for discussion, but you're focused more on the process and the implementation. Yeah.
We did that. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I think we'll get there. I think we're moving that direction, but we still have to get through another year or two, I think. But I'm trying to build it. We're building it as we go. Okay. College's financial structure. So think of this in 4 dimensions or 4 layers. Our fund, our program, an org, and an account. A fund, you'll hear us talk about the general fund. That's where 90% of the party is happening. It's our primary operations. It's how we account for almost everything we do. It's where we account for the tuitions, where we account for the state dollars. It's where we have most of our staffing costs. And it's how I forecast. I tie everything back to the general fund. Fund 2 is our essentially our auxiliaries, printing and graphics, our warehouse, our motor pool. We break out debt service on a separate fund, as also capital projects, but primarily they are our bond projects. Fund 4 is where all the bonds live. Fund 5 is financial aid. By federal law, we're required to pull financial aid apart. It has to live on its own. The enterprise fund is our student housing. So Titan Court downstairs. Downtown is accounted for by itself because it's a big function by itself. But if we had other capital projects, other big enterprise projects, that's where it would live too. Early retirement has mostly to do with paying for things like PERS. If we have faculty that retire early, if we pay for a lot of our benefits out of Fund 7. It's pulled apart specifically to account for those benefits. Fund 8 are grants and contracts. And Fund 9 is a quasi-auxiliary fund that has most of our self-sufficient programs, even though they're not all entirely self-sufficient. But it's things like international programs, KLCC, childcare, and the Flight Academy.
But they're pretty much self-funding in a sense, like they're managing the money that comes in is used for their project,
Yep, they're supposed to be. We have lost track over the years of helping them to live that way. And there's kind of a mix of things on Fund 9. And that's why you hear us talk about the deficits on sub-funds on Fund 9. It's
Yeah.
those programs that never were self-sustainable.
I
So
see.
the general fund contributes to them living.
Got it.
Jonathan, on PERS, how, are we current on that?
What do you mean, Ron?
Well, I know that certain schools and institutions are not fully funded.
We are current on it. And so there's a couple of things we've done. So we have a PERS bond, which in a sense, think of it as kind of an investment account. And so we pulled aside a few years ago a chunk of money off of our PERS bond and invested it in the market. And Kara can explain it a lot better than I can, but essentially it lives in this capital market fund where it pulls money back to us to offset the cost of PERS, but it varies with the market. So if the stock market goes down, our return on that investment goes down. If it goes up, then it's good. And you look at it over, it's kind of like an endowment. We are current on PERS, but our reserve, which I'll talk about during the FY26 budget hearings, we have pulled all of it to general fund, and we are now at a point where we need to recharge that PERS reserve. And that's to kind of mitigate the out year cost of PERS. In a couple of years, our bond is going to expire, and then the new rates will set in, which will make it more costly for our benefits, specifically our retirement benefits. So it's something we're planning for now. FY27 and 28 is going to be real tricky with our retirement benefits. But
Okay.
yep. Okay, so how we report to the state, we break it down by programmatic areas. Think of these as major functions that we do within the college. We do this intentionally because we want to capture the mission that we fulfill, the things that we do at the college that kind of break out into large groupings. On a day-to-day basis, this doesn't mean a whole lot, but the way that we report it to the state, it does. And that's why it's important for you to know this. So we have just a handful, and essentially think of this as faculty and the support of faculty. We have student services. Think of that as enrollment services, mental health services, the health clinic. Community services is more like KLCC. If we have something that's outward facing, that's not necessarily teaching, but it is related to our college. College support, plant operations, and plant additions is all of our business operations. So things like the bond, facilities, finance, and marketing, and my job, that's all in this. Financial aid, federally required to pull it apart. Debt service is all about the debt that we owe for the PERS reserve, for Titan Court, and so on. And then we also categorize our contingencies in our reserve as a separate planning dimension or different element. Within these programs and within these funds, these are our major divisions. We have academic affairs, which is mostly the instruction, it's the teaching, it's the faculty, it's all the programming. Finance and administration, which is me. Facilities, which is facilities. Human resources, IT, student affairs, marketing, and public relations, which is the outreach to Salem. And then the office of the president, which is our leadership. You'll see a VP or a vice president or an AVP leading each of these divisions, and then it rolls down from there. We have 60 or 70 units within these divisions, so it gets real granular when you start looking at the data. But generally speaking, this is how we do business every day. And then lastly, our account levels. So how do we tag the money that we spend and that we earn? We have revenue on one side and expenses on the other. But what's interesting is that Oregon budget law has us talk about it instead of revenues and expenditures. We talk about resources and requirements, because not all resources is going to be revenue. It could be something like a contingency or an ending fund balance. They think about it slightly differently. So if you hear us say resources and requirements, just distill it down in your head to its revenues and expenditures. Okay. All right, beyond the mechanics, here's a breakdown of all of our funds. So revenue, we have 3 major revenue streams. We have our state support, that's what we get from the state, a little bit more than that in the current coming year. We have property taxes and tuition, and then federal support Remember, this is all funds, so this is financial aid for the most part. And then everything else that comes on the fourth pillar of our revenue stream. Like I said, the party happens on Fund 1, and the three legs gets even bigger. So state support, so that's our state funding, is about 34%. Property tax is 28%, and tuition makes up the other part. And then everything else gets put into this little sliver that's a little bit less than a third of our total budget. Now, I promised that I would talk about the state funding model. Julie, do you remember us starting to talk about this at a board meeting and everybody's eyes crossed?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the breakdown of that. I think what's important to note is that the formula uses a rolling average for our allocation. So you remember I was talking about the pie has been getting bigger, but our allocation has stayed the same. That's how this is calculated. So TPR, that 870 million, plus they divvy that up to break it down into a base payment that is also a formula, plus our allocation. So they say right out the gate, everybody gets a little bit of the pie, and then the rest is calculated. It's calculated on a 3-year rolling average where the last year is the biggest driver of 40%. So say we had an enrollment where we said we went up 3%, 4%, 5% in the years consecutive. That 5% number is going to be a bigger driver than 2 years before that. So,
But if it was 3%, 4%, and 2%,
yep.
okay.
So they take that average, then they take out property tax, and then they say you can't grow more than a cap, right? And then that's what your payments are. So the cap changes every year, but it's more or less consistently set at 3%. There's a whole lot of conversation right now in this moment about whether or not we should have that. And if we're going to continue to use this model, how should this work? Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
was there ever a conversation in there that colleges were not supposed to grow, that they were actually they're supposed to cap their growth to track their funding? Or is it this literally was like, we're only going to give you 3%, you're on your own for the rest of you if you're successful? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, all of us have been declining in enrollment for the last 10 or 15 years, so it hasn't really been an issue, and I don't really know the full history behind it. But I do know that in the last year and a half, most of us have been over the cap. So what that means is you hit a threshold, and every student over that cap does not get included into the formula as contributing to your state allocation.
Got it. Okay.
They still generate tuition dollars though. So that's the thing. That's the conversation of how do you mitigate that? And none of us are so far over the cap that it's a huge problem right now. But say next year we had a huge bump in enrollment and we grew like 10%. Then it would be something that would be a huge driver of our costs.
Got it.
Yep. Okay. All right. So 84% is people. 84% of our budget are people. So you imagine if we have a change in costs. Julie, you talked about the increasing salaries. That's a huge factor for us. It drives a lot of the conversation because people do our job. People teaching kids, people teaching students. I supposedly am a grown-up. I'm here doing the job. I'm a person doing budget every day, right? So, but we have 84% of our budget makes up the whole thing. So it gets a little bit lower. Last year we dropped to 76%, and that's because we changed the lower denominator to try and invest back in things like training and capital projects, capital outlay, deferred maintenance, and so on. So how is a tuition dollar broken down? Roughly 54% of every dollar is spent on teaching, on instruction. We also have instructional services. So really it's about 61% that goes towards teaching our students. College support's about 20%. Student services, which is our enrollment services, advising, childcare and health, that's about 11%. And then 7% is on facilities. While I take a drink of water, I'm going to pause.
Can you go back to that dollar? I was writing down something and I missed the last thing. Got it. Yeah, I was like, I wanted to see. Plant ops, that's the one I missed. Okay.
And this is the based on the FY23 final audit. But it has stayed pretty consistent over the years. So we'll have an updated dollar graphic for our FY26 budget.
Okay. All right.
So what are our guiding principles? We use the strategic plan. We're revisiting the strategic plan because it's coming up in the next year and a half. We're going to have to do a new strategic plan. We apply the equity lens, the same one that you use at the board meeting, Julie. It's a similar concept. And then we have a few strategic goals, have really high level things that we want to accomplish that we're focused on. It's student success and engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion, and also financial stability. That's the one that we're really focused on the last couple of years because we know we have a lot of financial headwinds. That's why your job is important to help us kind of hash through that. We want to make sure that we're using current and reasonable and accurate data to make sure that we're spending taxpayer dollars and tuition dollars to really fulfill our mission to its best effect. So here is a link to the FY25 budget. The FY26 budget will look very similar. So if you want to start digging through it and kind of orienting yourself to it, it'll look more or less the same with updated information.
I can't click on that link. Are you going to send me that link?
I am going to send you this link.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right.
Yeah. Or Celia will. Somebody will. It's on our budget website too. So if you know where our budget website is, it's there. But we'll send it to you for sure. Okay, and then we have our next steps. We have budget committee hearings. I'm looking forward to being in the room with everybody, talking through this. We'll answer your questions the best we can. And then the idea is by June, beginning of June, we're going to pass a budget. So the May 7th board meeting, so after our budget committee, you'll also hear an updated Q3 forecast from Kara and also the FY25 audit results. So that'll be really foundational in how we think about the budget. Here's a whole bunch of links and resources for you to click through. Here's us. This is my awesome team that I work with every day. And with that, that's the end.
Wow, that was you did that quickly. Nice.
Yeah. Thanks.
When is that first meeting that we have, is the chair of the budget committee selected? Is that when that happens? Okay. Or is it the person just carries over from the last one, or?
No, so the way that will work is the chair of the board will gavel us in, and then we'll have opening statements. We'll talk about the process and the roles, and then we have a nomination and voting process where the board will nominate a chair and vice chair for the budget committee. The board will vote, then we'll gavel out, pass the gavel to the budget committee chair. That person of the budget committee will gavel in. And then we'll have some opening statements. Dr. Bolger will have an opening statement, and then I'll walk everybody through the FY26 budget as in kind of an orientation initiation of the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Ron, do you have any pearls of wisdom?
Oh, I don't think so. Some of the stuff is familiar through the city budgets that I worked on for years, which helps. And this presentation was very clear.
Thank you. Glad it was clear. Well, we're here to help. We're here to answer questions. We do the best we can. So if y'all have them, send them to us. Drop by. I look forward to working with you. I appreciate both of you.
So next week.
Next week.
All right.
And we're releasing the FY26 budget on Friday in electronic form, and then we'll print a couple of them. We'll print the hardback copy for the committee to have in your hand when you come on the following Wednesday.
Okay. Yep. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Nice to meet you, Ron.
Same here, Julie.
All right.
Thank
See you guys
both.
later.
Bye.
Bye.